Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for your patience. I'm Amy Dacey. I'm the Executive Director of the Sine Institute of Policy and Politics. We're sorry we can't be with you in person today, but we are so grateful that you're joining us for our first big event this semester and something that's really near and dear to our heart. It's the event where we introduce all of the fellows who will be spending time with us this year. We're incredibly proud of the group that is with us, and we want to get right to it. So I have the distinct honor of introducing our partner in this program and somebody we love working with, and that's Isha Mehta, who is president of the Kennedy Political Union, a co-sponsor of today's event, and certainly all the team that has pulled this together. We're really excited to get the conversation going. So Isha, why don't you go ahead and start?
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our virtual event tonight. My name is Isha Mehta. I'm the president of the Kennedy Political Union. On behalf of KPU, thank you for joining us for this special event introducing the 2026 Sine Institute Fellows. Today's program is proudly presented in partnership with the Sine Institute of Policy and Politics, the Kennedy Political Union, and the Presidential Speaker Series, which is a part of the Civic Life Initiative at American University. Together, these programs reflect AU's commitment to civic engagement, public dialogue, and experiential learning. The Sine Institute brings leading voices in politics, media, culture, and civic life to campus to engage directly with students and the broader AU community. The 2026 Fellows represent a remarkable range of perspectives and expertise, and we are honored to welcome them today. Before introducing our Fellows, it is my privilege to introduce someone whose leadership and vision makes this work possible, American University's President John Alger. President Alger is a nationally recognized leader in higher education and a strong advocate for civic engagement, free expression, and student-centered learning. Under his leadership, American University continues to strengthen its role as a place where ideas are debated, voices are elevated, and democracy is studied and practiced. Please join me in welcoming President John Alger. President Alger will be moderating today's panel, but first, I have the honor of introducing our 2026 Sine Institute Fellows. Kwame Alexander is a #1 New York Times bestselling author, poet, educator, and Emmy Award-winning producer. His work, including The Crossover and Booked, explores identity, belonging, and the power of storytelling, particularly for young people. Through poetry, prose, and education, he brings creativity into conversations about culture and civic life. Anna Palmer is the founder and CEO of Punchbowl News and one of Washington's most respected political journalists. With decades of experience covering congressional and political leadership, she brings deep insight into how power operates in American democracy and how information shapes public understanding. Maria Teresa Kumar is the co-founder and CEO of Voto Latino, a national civic engagement organization empowering new generations of Latino voters. An Emmy-nominated activist and leader, her work focuses on expanding civic participation, representation, and access to democracy. Kristen Soltis Anderson is a nationally recognized pollster, author, and political commentator. She is known for her research on generational politics, trust in institutions, and political behavior. Her work helps translate data into insight, shaping how we understand civic culture and public opinion. These fellows will engage with the students and the AU community throughout the year in classrooms, public events, and conversations that challenge us to think more deeply about leadership, storytelling, participation, and the future of democracy. At this point, it is my pleasure to hand the program over to President John Alger, who will moderate today's panel discussion with our 2026 Science Student Fellows. Please join me once again in welcoming President John Alger.
Thanks, Isha, and thank you, Amy, and all of you for joining us today, especially through all the snow. I hope everybody is in a warm place. So you probably all know that the Sine Fellows program is certainly about ideas that matter, but it's also about the people behind those ideas. So as we begin the 2026 Sine Fellows year and what we call the 250 Plus at American Initiative, I'd like to start with a simple but powerful question for each of our fellows, and that is this: what personal experience or turning point most shaped the work you are doing today? If we could start with Kwame, that would be great.
Thank you, President Alger. That's a loaded question. So when I was 3 years old, I'm going way back. I grew up on the Upper West Side of New York City, and my parents were in graduate school at a place called Teachers College, Columbia University. And so they were both studying literature in some capacity, literacy. And so books were everywhere in my home. They were punishment and reward. My mother taught Lucille Clifton to me, Langston Hughes. I think my favorite poet at 3 was a poet by the name of Dr. Seuss. And there was a book I'd memorized called Fox and Socks. And so I would run around my house screaming, Fox, socks, Knox, box. Fox and socks, socks and box. I love that book. Um, I fashioned myself a poet at 3 years old. I couldn't articulate that, but that's what I thought. One day at my school, I went to a school called Riverside Preschool, and it was in a church built by John D. Rockefeller. And at the end of school one day, I built a castle out of wooden blocks to show my mother when she came to pick me up so she'd be proud of me. And unfortunately, this kid in my class knocked the blocks over. And so I went up to him with the only weapons I had, and those were my words, and I fashioned myself Dr. Seuss. Those were my blocks that you flipped, lest you want a quick payback. Better fix my quick block stack. And he started crying. And so when my mother came to school, the teacher said, Mrs. Alexander, we have a problem. Your son Kwame is arrogant. He intimidates all the other kids with his words. And my mother said, thank you. We teach him to use his words. That was the moment for me where I knew the power of words. I couldn't articulate it as a 3-year-old, but I knew that they could be transformative.
That's a great story. Who knew that Dr. Seuss could play that kind of a role? Thank you, Kwame. Anna, how about you? A personal experience or turning point that shaped your work?
Yeah, I won't go in the Wayback Machine that far, but I appreciate it. Coming from North Dakota and growing up on a farm, I think where I really saw kind of truth to power and the idea of journalism as a vocation started when I moved to DC. You know, I was 22 years old. I had bleached blonde hair, a nose ring. I had no idea kind of how the system worked and came in very naively. But one of the things that was really instrumental to me was spending time on Capitol Hill and being a reporter there and being able to ask the most powerful people, the Speaker of the House and others, questions every single day. And they had to take me seriously. And to me, that kind of information exchange and the ability to really question the people that are in elected office has been fundamental to kind of my entire career.
Great. Thank you, Anna. Maria.
First of all, thank you so much for this program. I think that we are on the year of 250 years of our democracy, and what better time to have these conversations. So thank you so much, President Alger, and Amy, thank you for being so thoughtful in cultivating us today, because I think that when we talk about democracy, it is imperative to have these conversations on college campuses right now. Super inspired by your president who just spoke as well. I think she's incredibly articulate. More importantly, she is who Voto Latino targets. We deeply believe that if we get young people into the political fold, we can change not just policy, but the direction of our country. And I say this because they are technically now, between Gen Alpha and Gen Z, they're potentially the largest generations of Americans. And they're also the most diverse generation of Americans. And so when you ask, when was I politicized? I have to, err on Kwame's end. I was very young. I was lucky enough to come to this country when I was 3 years old. And I came from Bogota, Colombia, which at the time was a city of 6 million people, to a little town called Geyserville, California, where, President Alger, the last census, it barely hit 2,000 people. So you can imagine the dichotomy of my growing up, of remembering this really bustling New York City type of Bogota, Colombia that it is, to Geyserville, California. And in my experience, I remember, because my family came from Afro-Indigenous roots in Colombia, I knew that as a single mom, my life in Colombia was already determined and limited. I already knew that because of limited resources, I wasn't going to be able to be self-realized. But America had that promise. And so when I was 9 years old, I came back from a very important ceremony. I went to school. I was lucky enough to have a scholarship at St. Francis, the local Catholic school. And the teacher asked all my classmates, what are we grateful for today? And I raised my hand and she called on me and I said, I'm grateful because yesterday I became an American citizen. And no one in third grade understood what that meant, but I knew that I had a shot. And it was that growing up in Sonoma County that politicized me, because while I knew that there was this promised document that I could be self-realized, I also saw that Sonoma, as progressive as it was highly divided and socially stratified based on the landowner and those who work the fields. And it was no surprise to me, sadly, in 1992, when our fellow governor decided that Latinos were the problem and encouraged our community to vote against our values by passing the original Show Me Your Paper laws under Proposition 187. And even though that was the hardest time to be a Californian and to be an immigrant and to be even a naturalized citizen, what I learned from that experience was that myself and millions of young people at the time went home from college and had conversations about the importance of becoming US citizens, becoming registered and voting. And folks forget, but up to that point, California was a swing state. But because young Latinos and young Asian Americans had those frank conversations with their families about the importance of being a fully realized citizen in this country by having access and and vote and flexing our power at the voting booth, we had a voice. And so that was really the blueprint for Vote a Latino today. But it was really 9 years old, recognizing how lucky I was to choose this country, and this country chose me, and to be able to exercise its promise.
Thank you. We have very powerful issues that we're certainly talking about today. Kristen, how about you?
So thank you so much, President Alger, and for Amy and the crew at the Sine Institute for bringing us all together. I'm so excited about what this year holds for us. This is my 20th year working in politics. I hesitate to put a number on it, but I've now been in Washington for quite some time, and my journey here really began with being that student in high school who was on the debate team, watched The West Wing, all of that, went to the University of Florida, but just had the bug. I knew I needed to get to DC and just see what it was all about. And so when I arrived, I really wanted to be a communicator. I wanted to be a press secretary, a speechwriter, someone who was very much on the verbal side of things in politics. But the first job I wound up in, I was working as an intern for a political committee that at that point in the political cycle was doing nothing but fundraising. They were not in the speechwriting business. They were not in the message making business. They were in the let's raise a bunch of money business. Learned that I didn't really want to ever be involved in campaign fundraising, but also learned that seeing data about who was raising money and who wasn't, who was giving and who wasn't, having that quantitative way to kind of make sense of this political world I was learning about really interested me. And that's how I wound up taking an internship at a polling firm. That was to me going to be the merger of the verbal skills, as how do you persuade, how do you understand what people want, along with some of those data and quantitative skills. So that was the beginning of my journey into the polling world. And part of what I love about it now is that I really get to be someone who carries the message of what voters think. I don't represent the views of a particular principal, somebody who's an elected official, anything like that. I'm out there trying to get the perspective of average Americans and the people that are in my surveys, that into the bloodstream in Washington. And I love it very much.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. I hope you can see, those of you with us, that there are many different pathways to interesting careers and to be change makers. So we're going to now move quickly to a couple of questions for each of our fellows, then hopefully some conversation at the end. We'll have time for some audience questions. But Kwame, again, if I can go back to you, of course, I know that your work spans poetry and education and community. And you have a seminar that centers on the American imagination and shared narratives. And we're in obviously a very polarized climate. I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about what role can poetry and storytelling play in helping us to see one another fully, and how you've seen that through your career.
Look, before there were fireworks, there were words. Before there was an anthem, there was a hum. You think about the poetry of a Phyllis Wheatley in the 1700s, that was writing about freedom even while she was still chained. Or you think about Whitman in the 1800s singing democracy, or Langston Hughes um, writing jazz poems about dreams deferred, or now, as our former poet laureate Joy Harjo, um, writing about this land which spoke to us before it was even named by foreigners. And I like to think that poetry has a way, as I think Eliot said, of communicating with us before we even understand. It has the way of connecting us. And the beauty of it is, poetry is this sort of immediate thing that hits us in the heart. Before it even deals with our mind and our thinking, it hits us in the heart. And I posit that if you want to change the way people act, change the way they think. You want to change the way they think, change the way they feel. And what better, more surefire way than to do that than through the words on a page that bring rhythm and metaphor and conciseness and originality and sort of, as Langston Hughes said, and distills the whole human heart. I think ultimately, and I'm a little biased, I think poetry has the capacity, as Nikki Giovanni used to say, when it behaves, it has the capacity, President Elder, to allow us to become better human beings.
I
That's
love
just
it.
my thinking.
Absolutely. Well, and I must say, having worked with the Furious Flower Poetry Center in the past, I don't know if you know Joanne Gavin, but I
Yes.
very much appreciate what you're describing. So you've mentioned some of them already, but when you think about voices and stories, especially some that are often overlooked, who are you most eager, what voices are you most eager to elevate in this seminar?
So look, I am excited about working with these students. I know we have some student associates that are going to be working with us. And so, in truth, I would like to discover who those poets are. I'd like to go back and look at 250 years of America, and who are some of those poets and poets that define those decades and those eras that got us from the Revolutionary War to 47. Like, how did we get here? As there's the old Negro spiritual, how I got over. How did we make that sort of, trans, that how do we cross that bridge? And so I would like to find out who some of those poets are. I mean, I've written quite a few books and some anthologies that have a lot of wonderful poets like Mahogany Brown and Terrence Hayes and so many, Renee Watson, and so many beautiful poets. But I want to work with the students and discover some poets and some poems that we may not know about that have helped us get over, and that ultimately can provide a roadmap and a guide for how we can perhaps make the world more beautiful, especially during a time where so many people think that it may not be.
Thank you, Kwame. And certainly the importance of the humanities we are certainly hearing in your comments. And I would argue more relevant than ever in this age of artificial intelligence and social media. So Anna, if we can turn to you, we want to talk a little bit about different generations and how they relate to institutions and authority. Can you say a little bit about that and how you think about that? Those of us in higher education have to think about this, not just with our students, but also faculty and staff who span many generations.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that it underlies the seminar and the conversations I want to hold this semester. I mean, when I think about journalism, media, power, trust, and the next generation, we are going through a massive shift and change, right? In a time of political turmoil. And so I think there's a lot to be said around how do institutions show up right now? How do people find trust and the ability to trust, whether it's I started in much more traditional media, and I am now the CEO of a new media company that's 5 years old. How does Congress, right? And in talking to kind of how how do the people that work in those institutions that are in the public sector deal with these challenges as well as the private sector, and how do messages get transmitted across, right? I think there's a lot to unpack there. And one of the things I'm most excited about is really thinking about bringing in some practitioners who aren't just in the media, but are in different spaces so that we can talk about what has changed over time. And then also, I think, really think and really hear from the students about where their questions are, about how do they kind of engage, where are we going forward, because we are in a movement in a time of such fast change that I think all of us as institutions, whether it's higher education, again, media, where I spend most of my time, or other places, are trying to play catch up and making sure that we're also learning some lessons about what we can take from that next generation.
So when you think about this generation, what gives you hope, and maybe what most concerns you when you think about their relationship with civic life? Obviously, there's a lot of turmoil in our politics and governance right now, but think about hope and concern.
I mean, I think engagement. I think one of the things, being at a student campus, the thing I'm most excited and was bummed we aren't there today, is to get the enthusiasm and engagement, right? I think it's very easy sometimes as you go through the world and to get cynical, or, kind of hard, to kind of keep that fight up. And I think one of the things that I've always loved about kind of being involved with kind of colleges and universities is that enthusiasm and energy, and looking at things from different perspectives, right? Sometimes we get pretty tunnel vision when, you've kind of been doing this work for 20 plus years. And I think the thing that is impactful is we are in a time of massive change. I mean, whether you're talking about what's happening in Minneapolis, or what's happening with government funding, or all kinds of things. I mean, the ability to make sure that people are getting information from the right sources and from true sources. I think that's one of the things that we as a society are continuing to engage with, right? As we think about different platforms and how people receive information, making sure that there is that kind of verification, as well as making sure you get a wide variety, not just kind of a self-reinforcing belief system of kind of information coming from that. And so that's what I want to have that conversation. But where are they? Where should we be looking? How can we be better at distributing information as well?
That's such an important and timely topic. Thinking about information and data literacy, one of the key skill sets, right? I mean, there's all this information available to us, and yet, where is it coming from? What are the biases of the sources? So very, very important and timely topic for all of us. Maria, if I can turn to you, your work, of course, is deeply connected to community and representation. And you talked a little bit in your intro about that long arc of Latino civic engagement and how it's made a difference. So what lessons from that history do you think are especially important for strengthening democracy today?
No, I think that the moment that we're in is the fact that folks have not realized that let me back up. I actually think that the reason we're here is because many institutions, whether we're talking about politicians, whether we're talking about entertainment, whether we're talking about culture, whether we're talking about traditional institutions, is that we've buried the lead on what America actually looks like in this moment. And I will give the example that my daughter is 13 years old, and she is technically a majority minority generation. She is the first alpha generation. And we haven't had the opportunity for anyone to really talk about how the United States is vastly different from what it looked like even 25 years ago. And that is because we are truly a multicultural democracy. And we started working specifically at Voto Latino on the Latino community when we learned that the census discovered that 52% of the growth back in 2010 was because of Latino births. So American-born Latinos. Fast forward for 2020, the same thing. The biggest transformation of our democracy is because we have young Latinos being born every 30 seconds. A Latino turns 18 years old, and no one was ready for it. Leadership never talked about it. If you were to go into the majority, even of our classrooms, or to walk the halls of Congress, the people that are teaching or the people who are creating policy don't reflect America. And so in the seminar, I'm looking forward to, one, really learn about the experiences of the students that are in the classroom. I think that we need to really start talking about the importance of what multicultural means in this moment, and also start unpacking why are our voices missing and what are the instruments that are available to us to meet the moment that America is struggling to recognize itself in, and the importance of allyship. I think oftentimes these conversations have a tendency of siloing what American means, and it allows us, and it doesn't allow us to actually come under a unified umbrella of what it is to be American in the 250 years and what do we do to look forward. So in these conversations, I'm looking, one is to understand the experiences of the people in the classroom. Young people, I think, oftentimes are at the forefront and they have ideas, and they are also the ones that if we don't have them participating civically, we won't have a thriving democracy that we need.
And are there things other than having, seminars like the one that you're going to be doing? We think about universities and other types of institutions. What can we do to better support inclusive participation in light of the facts that you've laid out? We're a different country now, and it seems like there are a lot of people that still don't quite recognize that change.
Yeah, what's fun is that young people recognize that change. What's really fun is that when we have, so Voto Latino, we right now have over 250 college campuses across the country. And we don't have to convince young people whether or not climate change is real. We don't have to convince them whether or not they get to choose who they love. Like, the adults are the ones that seem to have a problem with quote unquote woke. And so what we need to do is provide young people with the instruments so that they are not only able to, one, advance complex ideas in a way that is civil, but in a way that is also purposeful, number one. But also, I think it's also giving them the instruments to decipher what is true and what is not. And though in the moment that we're living, I think one of the challenges is that they are so far ahead of the use of technology and information, and we're trying to catch up. And how do we basically create spaces where they can teach us, but we also can teach them? It's for me, I love working with young people because oftentimes what we find is that their ideas they actually know how to solve big problems, but we oftentimes don't give them the runway to do so. And so my hope is that for this, not only to have debate, but also making sure that they have the agency that they need to lay the groundwork for the next 250 years. People say, well, I voted, what else? I said, run for office, right? Run for school board. Like, it's actually, there are spaces where we can start participating locally now to have big impact nationally as well.
Right. And that's the beauty of being on a college campus. We get to be surrounded by that energy and that sense of possibility all the time, and we all learn from it. So thank you, Maria, for that. So Kristen, if we can turn to you, I know you've done a lot of work emphasizing what I consider the most underappreciated leadership skill, which is listening. And I know your work also translates data into insight. So how have your assumptions been challenged over time by what people actually say when they feel listened to? Can you say a few words about that?
Yeah, so I got very into this idea of listening, in part because a few years ago, what I realized was so important about the polling industry, even in a world where there were lots of people who had very valid questions about, like, well, are you all actually that good at predicting elections? Was realizing that 99% of what we do is not about predicting an election within a point or two. That most of what we are doing is helping people to do a better and more rigorous job at listening to their audiences, whether that is their customers, their voters, their employees. That in our society today, there are lots of ways that people have access to microphones, and that has potentially really exciting upsides, right? We now have people who are more, you don't have to have an intermediary to speak your mind, to get your voice heard by powerful people. At the same time, oftentimes those microphones get into the hands of people who have the most extreme views. They're the ones who have the most that they really want to say. That's lovely, but there are plenty of Americans who have very important things to say as well, but they're too busy to go to the Capitol and lobby. They don't have the resources to hire a lobbyist, but their voices matter too. And their voices matter in between elections. In a democracy, we all have a chance to make our voice heard at the ballot box. But in between those 2 to 4 year cycles, it also matters what people are thinking. And so polling allows you to do the job of listening in a statistically rigorous way and to capture the voices of those who might not be as loud. Part of what that lets me do is uncover, are there certain, viewpoints that are more widely held among voters than you might realize if your perception of the average voter is coming from ingesting a steady stream of social media content or just hanging out in quote unquote this town, where people are not like the median voter. The other thing that I've really loved about what I get to do in listening to voters is you sort of realize that, on the one hand, they are not as plugged into politics as people in this town, but that's that's actually a good thing. Sometimes I will hear political consultants get very dismissive of voters, like, oh, voters aren't that smart, they're checked out. And what I instead find is when I get to do focus groups to talk to voters, is that there's actually a great deal of sort of common sense and creative thinking and outside the box approaches and a belief that we don't just have to keep doing things the way we've always been doing them, that I often find very inspiring. So that's a big piece of why I want to bring listening as a theme of what I'm doing. I don't just want my seminar to be, here's how you do statistics and data. I want it to be about why asking people what they think has real value in a democracy as a sort of additive to when we let people make their voices heard at the ballot box, and the other ways that people can make their voices heard if they have the resources to do so. I think that polling plays an important role in that ecosystem.
Right. And when you talk about this phrase of listening at the center, can you say a little bit more about how you think about that in practice across all the different divides we see? It sounds like one thing we all need to do is get outside the beltway once in a while, which is a good reminder. But what does that mean to sort of listen at the center? I mean, you've described something that comes across differently than just what we see in the newspaper with the public opinion polls when they try to always make it look like the country is so hyper divided.
So there are sort of two things at play there. First, there's center as the political center, and how right now, in my view, folks who sit either at the political center or just maybe aren't in one of the traditional easy to pigeonhole type ideological groups, that sometimes I think those voices aren't heard. And so a bit of what I want to cover in the seminar is how do we ask questions that can better illuminate places where there might be more common ground than we realize. If you're just listening to highly divided, partisan-ish news, you might miss that there's more common ground than exists. But I also think listening at the center is also a mindset. You've heard that old adage, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you should listen in the appropriate proportions. And I think in politics, there's a lot of talking and not a lot of listening. And so I think having listening at the center of what you do makes you better able to be a good public servant, makes you better able to be an advocate for what you believe. And so it's both about how do we study where a political center might be and what it might look like in practice, but also how do you make listening central to the way you act and conduct yourself and operate in the political sphere.
Terrific. Well, a very important skill for all of us. So I'm glad that we're focusing on that topic. So if we can turn now to some conversation with all of you, we'll start with this question. Across your journeys, I hear themes of voice, trust, belonging, and connection. So how have your personal background shaped not just what you study or teach, which we've heard some about, but how you engage with people who may see the world differently, which is something that we all are challenged by? Who would like to jump in? We don't have to go in any particular order. I can call on people just like all of you can, right? As a teacher. Anna, are you willing to jump in?
Sure. I mean, I think my experience is different than a lot of people in Washington, certainly in media. I grew up on a farm in North Dakota. And so obviously rural, homogeneous, but having different kind of challenges as a state. And I think one of the things that's really important is that I've learned, I think, when I was younger, I probably tried to put on a facade of, I'm just like everybody else. But I think that there is a lot of power and benefit to leaning into kind of your background and coming from a place that out of most institutions in journalism, I was different than a lot of the people that were there. Excuse me. And so I think that really brings a lot of benefit for all of us, right? And I think to be embracing of that. And I think it's something we've thought a lot about is building a company and hiring and kind of thinking about diversity in all different flanks, but certainly is something that I think I bring a very different lens than most people probably didn't grow up. I listened to the Farm Report every single day at lunch, right? Teens and the beans. Otherwise, you couldn't get new school shoes, right? I mean, it's just a different perspective than a lot of people. And I always try to come back to that because I think it's really important when you think about kind of what you're trying to get across that you're coming from. People come from all different kinds of places.
I love that. And the authenticity, right, is something I've talked a lot about to students, that you can be successful in many different careers and leadership capacities, but bringing your whole self and your authentic self is so important. And that's, I think, what we're hearing from you. Anybody else want to jump in about how you engage with people who see the world differently?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in on this one. So,
Okay.
a big piece of my early career was spent studying younger voters, and in particular, the divide that had emerged between my generation, the millennial generation, and the Republican Party. I was a very young pollster, but personally leaned more conservative, and began to notice an exciting dynamic, which was that the friends of mine from high school and college who previously hadn't cared about politics at all started to care. No longer was I the oddball. That was good. But what was bad was they would say, well, Kristen, how can you be Republican? You seem so nice and normal. And I realized that there are lots of perceptions that we have about what labels mean, what different, if you say you're conservative, that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It can send signals that you may or may not realize it's sending. And so that kind of curiosity about when people hear a word like Republican, or they hear a word like moderate, or they hear, about a particular policy position, but they just hear the one sentence version. People can hear very different things about what that means. And so that for me was a very formative experience, was in studying a lot of this data about where did young people fall politically, seeing that actually was not the case. I've spent a lot of my career debunking a fake Winston Churchill quote. He did not say that if you're young and liberal, you have no heart, and you're old and conservative, you have no brain. But a lot of people think he said that and quote that to me a lot as if it's this very smart insight. And I'm like, my friend, I have got an enormous amount of data for you that I have studied that says it's not remotely true. And so, learning to realize that people have preconceived notions about what things mean, about how the way things work, and that I can use smart research and data to kind of unpack that a little bit more and figure out what's really going on, is part of my background that informs how I sort of had my career develop.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. Kwame, I'm still replaying in my mind the story with the blocks and Dr. Seuss, but talk to us a little bit about how you engage with people who see the world differently. Obviously, we know you use your words in very powerful ways, but can you say more about engaging with people who see the world in very different ways?
Yeah, I'm going to be the Pollyanna person on this Zoom, so apologies. I'm not a big fan of words like diversity. I think this kind of deficit language is dangerous. And I think it others us. It creates division in our mind. And I've never been a big fan of that. I wrote a novel called The Crossover. It was published in 2014. And I remember, of all places, I was in Minnesota at a librarians conference. God bless librarians. And this librarian came up to me in my book signing line, and she said, "Mr. Alexander, I love this book. I'm gonna teach it to my fifth graders. They're gonna come in the library and we're gonna have reading circles. But before I teach it to them, I need to know what color the characters are in your book. Are they black or white? Because my kids are gonna ask, and I'm gonna have to have an answer for them." And my response to her was, if your kids ask, then email me and I'll tell you. And maybe a week and a half later, she emailed me and she said, "Mr. Alexander, you were right. The kids didn't ask." Because as someone said earlier on this call, the kids aren't the problem. It's the adults. For some reason, we like to segregate and separate. I posit that whether you were on a farm in the Midwest or like Anna was, or whether I was in Chesapeake, Virginia, picking snap beans on my grandmother's farm, or whether you were in Brooklyn, New York, playing stickball in the street. I posit that at the end of the day, people, I guarantee you, we all eat, dance, smile, laugh, drink, love, sleep, live, die, just like everybody else. And I posit that it is the poetry that can remind us of that. It is the E. E. Cummings. It is the I Carry Your Heart in My Heart. It is the Dickinson. It is the Hope is the Thing with Feathers that perches on the soul. I posit that it is the poetry that can remind us of those gaps and those promises that we hope that American can become.
I love that. Thank you, Kwame. And it's a great reminder. We've talked a lot, by the way, in our Civic Life Initiative here on campus about finding common ground and really thinking about our common humanity, which I think is what you're reminding us of. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the labels that are used all the time, and your colleagues here have talked about it, right? Once people get labeled in certain ways, it creates that division, that sense of otherness. And I think we'd all be better served by focusing more on what is that common humanity that links us all together. We perhaps could solve a lot more problems.
And I would also add, Maria talked about how, this is why her work is so important. Maria talked about how not enough people recognize the changing of America.
Absolutely.
I posit that maybe they do recognize. And that's the problem.
And that's it.
And that's the problem. That they
Kwame, we need to have a debate. We need to have a debate.
Maria, do you want to comment on that and also maybe just talk about how you engage in this kind of an environment?
No, so I'll share with you. I was raised translating, and I say this because my mother married my father. My father was, 6'2" of Danish descent. He met my mother in Colombia. My mother was a single mother at the time, and they fell in love. And in short order, my father got gravely ill, President Alger, and we couldn't stay in Colombia. And so it was circumstance that brought us back to his home, which was Geyserville. And my grandparents were grape growers. They were farmers. And it's interesting how three of the four of the panelists all have a rural experience that informs our work and made us. And you can imagine coming home to my grandparents' farm with their only interaction between brown people and themselves were the farm workers. And as my father convalesced, meaning that he had to learn how to talk and become whole again, they sent my mother to the field to work and to pick grapes and to prune them. And, we joke that that was probably the first time my mom had ever seen a plant in her life, let alone pruning. And so I started culturally translating since I was 3 years old, because I recognized that my grandparents, while they meant well, they saw my mother very differently based on the color of her skin and the fact that she didn't speak English. And that, I think, informed my worldview throughout, recognizing that when we build bridges and try to find commonality, to Kwame's point, we all live life, we all breathe, we all in commonality, but it is different, environments that inform us and divide us. And I do believe that right now there is a concentrated effort to divide us. And I say this because there is incredible beauty and strength in a multicultural America in a moment of interglobalization. And there is also an opportunity to basically, by dividing us, to allow people in power not to have the ability, basically to pillage when we are divided. And that's for a broader conversation. And it's interesting, like one of the very first times I, again, was planted in America and her possibility. One of my favorite books was Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. My mother was, I didn't have my daycare was literally the library. I had to walk. I started walking to the library since I was in 4th grade, and I'd spend hours there. And I loved that book so much that I actually stole a copy of it. and when the book was due, I said, "No, here's another one." And they're like, "Yeah, but that's a different copy." But it was because it spoke to a rural American experience. As a brown girl that I was able to identify the injustices that was being placed as an African American in this country. But it provided me with the complexity of what this country is from early on. But I loved it, and I didn't see that. When I spent time with my grandparents, I saw them for who they were, but not that they were evil, but more that they were of their circumstance. And how do we actually bind them, bind this moment? And actively, as a result, we're actually been working with a coalition that Latino put together, where we are working with veterans, we're working with Forma MAGA, we're working with police, and we're working with clergy on how do we bring Americans together, not on political stripes, but as people who fundamentally believe in our democracy and in our nation.
Certainly hearing some notes of empathy, understanding, listening, some common themes that we are hearing today. Amy, I know I need to turn it over to you, that you have some questions from our audience. So is Amy able to share? There she is. Take it away, Amy.
I wish we could do this all afternoon, quite frankly, and I'm learning so much, but we do have some great questions. We're probably not going to be able to get to all of them, but I want to say that the first one is really for all of you, and one of the ones that I found most compelling, it's for our graduate students, School of Public Affairs, Anaya, and she wants to know from each of you, what do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of American democracy today? And how can your fields like narrative, data, civic engagement, journalism work to address it? It's not, this is the type of questions you're going to get from our students on campus, and I'm excited to share it. Kristen, do you want to kind of start us off?
Sure. I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I find myself kind of debunking about the way our democracy works is that, people have a lot of dissatisfaction with our two-party system, but then kind of get frustrated with like, well, why don't we have more options? Or why hasn't a third party emerged that, looked like what I believe? I've used surveys over the last few years to try to understand, for those folks who don't really feel like they fit in one party or the other, what do they feel? And what's valuable about that research is it can show you that those folks that don't feel like either party is serving them well believe a lot of different things. They are not all one cohesive unit. There's some people that pick a little from column A, from column B. There's some people that are to the right of everything that both of the parties. There are people that are to the left of where they think both of the parties are. And so I think one of the things that I like being able to learn is when people are dissatisfied with the way things are working and aren't sure why change hasn't happened, is there actually something in people's revealed preferences rather than just what they say about themselves that can help explain what seems like it's not working in our democracy?
Kwame, you want to kind of talk a little bit about what you think is the most misunderstood aspect of American democracy?
Sure. Let me just say this. First of all, Kristen, I think you and I might live on the same block. Because I'm looking behind you, that beautiful landscape, that looks like my block. But I really want to get to know and learn from each of you. That's what I'm excited about. I intend to attend whatever sort of virtual or in-person seminars that I can, because I want to learn from you. When I was 12, my father was the headmaster of our school. We were in Brooklyn, New York at that time. And that's the worst kind of thing, for your father to be the head of your school. And so one day we wake up and he said, "We're not going to school today." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because we're going to march over the Brooklyn Bridge." And this is during Mayor Ed Koch's reign. And I say, "I'm not marching over a Brooklyn Bridge. That's not me." And my mother's like, "Why?" And she's like, "I don't like, because they're going to open the bridge on us and we're all going to fall in and die." And of course, the Brooklyn Bridge isn't a drawbridge. But at 12 years old, I'm thinking, I'm not doing this. My father says, "We're marching the death, the murder of a man by the name of Arthur Miller, who was killed by the police." And of course, I'm down for the cause, but I don't want to do this. My mother and father dragged me to this march. All of my classmates are there. I'm crying. I'm bawling because I don't see the purpose in this. I don't see the point in me dying right now for this. And I cry, and we get to the other side of the bridge. My friends are looking at me like I'm crazy. And then when we get to the other side of the bridge, there are police on horses and their dogs, and then all of a sudden somebody starts singing. We're fired up, we can't take no more. We're fired up, we can't take no more. And there are these chants and there are these songs, and before you know it, I'm singing, and I'm just like caught up in it, and the words and the melody and the are taking over. And I realize in that moment I stop crying and I feel grounded, and I can't articulate it at that point, but I see how important it is to have a voice and to lift it, and that perhaps I can make a difference. And I think, so many teenagers, including my own, she's a senior in high school now, and they don't believe they have a voice, or rather, they don't believe their voice matters. And I really feel, Anna, that's a misperception. Like, our job in the media is to, those of us who care about our children, gotta let them know they do have a voice.
It's
That's
really,
my that's my thought.
yeah, it's really powerful, Kwame. And I know, Anna, you are in the halls of power all the time, especially with the incredible work that Politico, but especially with Punchbowl News and how you are around the Capitol all the time. Like, what do you think is the most misunderstood part of American democracy? I mean, you're in the center of it on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, I think Maria probably lives this, but every day is I think people have so much more power than they realize. I really do. Like, I think that when you look at the ability for people to contact the Hill or work on social media. The fact that there's really been, I think, in the 20 some years I've been here, there's such an ability to reach and influence what happens in politics in a way that I think people should, I hope students should feel like there's a real ability for power, right? You're seeing it in real time all the time on a bunch of different things. And I think the other thing I would say is, when I got into journalism, we've really become to the kind of opposition party, and I just don't think that that's accurate. I think that the vast majority of people who do this job, it is vocational. I think it is like truly a service job of bringing information to people that otherwise would not have it. And so that's one of the things I think is the most misunderstood. And so I think if I can kind of have conversations about that, about how do you lift up and kind of create powerful abilities to kind of make change or have your voice heard, and then also kind of being a testament to the idea that there is really good journalists out there that are doing factual, important work to get information out there. It's kind of my mission for this effort.
I know people are excited to have that conversation. Maria, what about you? What do you think is the most misunderstood?
That it's guaranteed. And I think that in this moment, it's very clear that when we don't participate, then the people that do, whether on this super progressive or on this super right, they're the ones making choices. And one of the biggest things that we learned in the last election, for example, in the Hispanic community, is the headlines read that Latinos moved from left to right. And there was some of that. But the most underreported story was a third of Latinos who had voted in 2020 sat it out in 2024. And when you started looking at who it was disproportionately young people. And that could be said across the board. Young people are not flexing their power. And we need them to be part of the game, because one of the things that we have done is worked very closely with Brookings and with Harvard University. And we learned from democracies around the world that those who participate the most are the least radicalized. And there are, I would say, 5 branches of government that we don't talk about. We have our traditional ones that were enshrined in the Constitution. We have Congress, the judicial, and the White House. But then we have the other two, and that is the fourth estate of the media. We need them strong and powerful so that they can hold transparency to account, give us transparency so that we as a public can hold power to account. And then it's the civil society that no one talks about. And that is the nonprofit area that basically meets the gaps of where government fails to do and where corporation fails to do. And we basically provide pressure on all three. right? And so I think that for young people to recognize that the democracy has not been fulfilled, because oftentimes when I go to college campuses, people are very easily ready to point to all of America's missteps throughout history and our tragedies. And I have to acutely remind them that this is an evolving document. And while America has not made itself possible, doesn't mean that it hasn't stopped. And that the way it is self-realized is our maximum participation. That is how you stave off polarization, is for us to get in the game and to think about running for office and to make phone calls and to write reports and to be part of that system. Because I have to share with you, Amy, I've been very privileged to travel around the world. And had my mother ended up in Sweden for as long as we would have been in Sweden, I would have never been Swedish. And I think it's really important for us to remember what makes us so unique, even in our pain, even in our history. And that is that there is this beautiful document that lays out what our possibility is. And that possibility is only self-realized when we participate and when young people actually take the reins and saying, this is the world that we want to live in.
Incredible. And we have time for like one more question. And it's interesting because I think as you navigate your time on campus and with our students, there's going to be questions on the substance and what we were discussing today in the conversation that President Alger led. But there's also this hunger to have very successful people share some of their, challenges, some of their insights. And this question is from Jude, another one of our grad students. He kind of said, like, listen, we've got all founders, on this stage too, whether it's Kwame's One Word at a Time or Anna's Punchbowl News or, Kristen's Echelon Insights or Maria with you and Voto Latino. You all created something. You are founders. And so the question is more just an advice, like, how do you find that process? Like, how do you find the courage to be the one that creates something brand new? And so I'm really curious, Anna, what kind of, being able to be the founder of Punchbowl News, like that was a risk and you took it. So they're curious about that.
Yeah, happy to talk more about it. It was the biggest risk I probably have taken in my life. My mom definitely did not think it was a great idea to start a company in the middle of COVID, in the media business, which is clearly struggling across the board. I would say this. I mean, I think the most amazing thing for so many people and hopefully the students that are going to attend our seminars is the ability to start your own thing, and the barrier to entry is so much less than it was when 20 years ago, when institutions and kind of there was like the way that it was done, just in terms of technology, in terms of reaching audiences, in terms of kind of thinking about globalization and AI. I mean, that to me, the most exciting thing is if you have an idea to get to fruition now is a lot easier and faster than it could ever have been before, and takes a lot less money in terms of raising it. So I would love to have this conversation, how to do it, things that risks and risks are important to take, especially when you're young. Like, you have nothing to lose in a lot of ways, right? You don't have the big mortgage and the kids going to school and all the things. Like, this is the time where you can be really you can dream big. So I'm excited to talk more about that with anybody who's interested.
I know it'll be a big topic. What about you, Kristen?
Yeah, I would echo what Anna said about if you are young, take the risk. And I know that feels, I know when I was very early in my career, I didn't feel like I could take risks then. Like, I felt like I actually needed to establish myself before I could go do the big, scary thing. And in hindsight, I almost wish I had done the big, scary thing earlier in my career. I mean, I was 30 when I did it instead of 25, but and I learned a lot doing the safer thing for a few years. But I think it's very easy when you are in college or when you're early in your career to think that like the thing you do in the next 6 months is going to be like a forever thing, or what you do now is going to have an unchangeable, it's going to set you in a direction and you're going to just be rolling in that direction forever and there's no way to change it. And that is not true at all. In fact, while you are still younger, that is the time where if you feel like you are off course and doing something that you're not loving, that's the exact time to try something radically different, because actually your ability to do the risky thing narrows later on. I had it inverted, and I always want younger people to realize, no, take the risks when you're younger. Nothing is forever.
What about you, Kwame? You've taken a couple risks, and now with this incredible organization you've created that we're going to get introduced to our students.
Before the nonprofit, One Word at a Time, before the Newbery Medal, before the Emmy Award, before the 50 books, before the 2,000 school visits, before this writerly life that I've been blessed and honored to be able to live, I thought I was successful. I thought I was a big deal. In my mind, I thought I was something. Goes back to that 3-year-old story. I'm a 23-year overnight success. I think, as Langston said, and I'm sure everyone on this Zoom can relate, I've been scarred and battered. My hopes the wind and shattered. Snow has frizzed me. Sun has baked me. I think between them, they done tried to make me stop laughing, stop loving, stop living. But I don't care. I'm still here. We're still here. And as long as we're here, we got a responsibility to live our lives to the fullest.
Well, that's inspirational. What about you, Maria, as a founder, as a creator?
So I stumbled into it, and it was more because I recognized that people kept getting. Let me back up. I started my career on Capitol Hill for Vic Fazio, and California at the time was changing rapidly. And one of the things I learned being in Capitol Hill is that at the time I was one of 22 Latino staffers. Now there's over 400, right? Just to give you a sense of, we were small. And we would be in these policy discussions, everything from who got relieved of bankruptcy reform, where student loans were not allowed to be declared bankrupt, but everybody else who made unwise decisions were, to who actually had access to healthy meals. And I had this, aha moment that here I am, a congressional staffer working on appropriations, working on some really big pieces of legislation with really intentioned members of Congress who didn't know who their constituency were. And it was that moment when I realized that the only way we can start bringing America forward was trying to get as many young people in the fold from the very beginning. And one of the things that when we did with Voto Latino, I'll never forget, it was so hard because we started, for people, only people on this call will understand who they are, students will not. We started Voto Latino on MySpace, to give you a real idea, right? And to Anna's point, it was because it was cheap, it was tech, and that's where my biggest audience was. And it was a low price to entry. And I did it on my credit card. Don't do that, right? Because it was a terrible way to start. But by doing that, I realized that America writ large was missing my generation, meaning they were missing first generation Latinos who were translating America for their families, who didn't have information, but who were doing it in all these spaces. And what would happen if we can start registering them and getting them to vote at scale? When we started Voto Latino, we had registered less than 2,400 folks. To date, we've registered close to 2 million. By Wikipedia, by AI, there's roughly 179 million Americans that are registered. By that math, very proudly, Voto Latino has registered 1% of them. And it was an idea that if we get people involved, and we focus very much on swing states where Latinos were the most marginalized, and we'll continue at it. But from there, I've actually seen incredible people come out of Voto Latino who are now members of Congress, who had, decided that was transformative. We've seen people start coming out of Voto Latino who started their own small businesses. And so it's not just a matter of the work we've done, but how are we paying it forward to inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs? And I think that for most immigrant families, which is very true for me, when I was trying to decide, whether or not to take this path, Kristen, for example, was my mom saying, well, the reason we're here is so that you can be what you want. So you're undefined. And my mom said, I defined myself by the work that I had to take on so that you could be undefined on what you got to pursue. And I think that is what makes America really special. And so if you have an idea, you have to be the smartest person in the room. You really do, especially if you're a woman of color. You really have to know your stuff, and you have to know the other person's stuff too. And then you have to make sure that you're ultimately prepared and bring all of that to bear. But at the same time, doing it with recognizing what you don't know and not being afraid to ask for help.
Thank you so much. I've got some ways. We unfortunately run out of time, but we're going to have more of your time throughout the semester. But before I say how to stay engaged, President Alger, do you have any final thoughts or anything you want to add before we tell everybody how they can engage with these incredible fellows for the rest of the year?
Well, I just want to say thank you, Amy, to you, to Isha, and certainly to our fellows. This really enriches the educational environment here at American University. And This is such an important year for us, the semi-quincentennial of our country. And I think you all know we're trying to use this as an opportunity to reflect not just on where we've been or even on where we are right now, but it's 250 plus very deliberately, because the plus is looking toward the future. And that's what we're really excited about, to be able to imagine that future together. And you all have given us a lot to think about and to contemplate. And we want to do that with the help of many different disciplinary lenses. So thank you for what you're contributing to our environment. I hope that we'll have many opportunities to interact over these next few months. It's been great to be with you.
Well, thank you, President Alger, for all of your time and for really creating these initiatives and supporting all of the work that we're doing. We're really honored to have you leading the charge for us here at American University. I just want to thank all the fellows. Of course, we were disappointed that we weren't all in person today, but so many people joined the webinar today. They are interested. So many more people on campus will be interested as well. Just some ways to stay in touch. We want to make sure that people are following the Sine Institute, on our social media, our newsletter. We're going to have all the information about the events coming up that you can find that way. We encourage you, and in our next communication with everybody, we'll share all the organizations that our fellows work for, so you can start following them. We certainly want you engaged with Punch Bowl News as well, and where we've talked to the groups and certainly One Word at a Time, and with Voto Latino and Echelon Insights, we're all going to be working together. We have individual dates throughout the semester that we're going to share in the screen right now. And so the fellows will be with us in February, March, and April. Each one will do an individual event that you get to meet with them and work with them. And then I also want to just thank a bunch of people today. We did pivot pretty fast. We're pretty good at that here at American University. The weather won't get us down. I want to thank everybody on the Sine Institute team. I also want to thank the President's Office for everybody that helped, from UCM to Tech to our partners at KPU and in the other initiatives. Everybody worked really hard, and our fellows offices as well. Your team has been amazing to help us make sure that your voices were brought to campus today, even though it was virtually. So we're really proud to also be a part of the 250 plus initiative in American. We also encourage you to, we've got some presidential events, speaker series events coming up as well. I know that Charlie's going to share those with you as well. These are incredible conversations. As you see, our President Alger leads a great conversation with individuals on campus. We have some events February, March, and April, bringing in some incredible speakers on campus as well. And we just want you to stay engaged with the Sine Institute team as well. We're going to share that information with you. We want you to stay engaged. And at the Sine Institute, we like to say, we like to convene, communicate, and collaborate. What I like to think is that it's important that we all got together today and we got on this webinar and shared some of our thoughts. But I want to also say what we do when we leave, I usually say this room, but when we leave this webinar is equally important. So if you want to continue the conversation, if you want to meet these incredible fellows, if you want to have conversations with different perspectives and learn something new while you're on campus, please be engaged. I'm not, this is my favorite fellows class of all time. I will deny saying that, but it's public. I'm excited because of the way we're, setting this up and how you're creating the conversations and the way you'll engage. We have been very fortunate in our program. We are honored to have all of you, and we look forward to seeing everybody on campus this spring. And so thank you all for your time, and we can't wait to get you on campus and with our students in our community. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, President Alger.